You have arrived at the Private Land Conservation Conference for 2023, organised by the Australian Land Conservation Alliance. I'm Dr. Anne Jones, but I'm not going to give a preamble today. I'm going to save it because I want the first person that you connect to in this place to be Auntie Violet. Auntie Violet Sheridan is a Ngunnawal elder and a community hero for the ACT. Her superpower, I understand, is being able to find common ground with everyone, no matter the background. And boy, do we need that more than ever. She's contributed so much to reconciliation, not just the grand gestures, but the hard work of everyday reconciliation in her community. So Auntie Violet, thank you so much for coming to meet with us today.
So it is my pleasure to welcome you to my mother's country, the land of the Ngunnawal people. But before I go on to my welcome, I'd like to acknowledge Minister for the Environment, Tanya, Plibersek, other distinguished guests there, and ladies and gentlemen. I hope you know I was up at 5:30 this morning, and I'll have to get matchsticks to put on my eyes. But I believe a welcome to country is a traditional Aboriginal blessing, symbolising the traditional owners of the land welcoming you, but it also shows respect for the first peoples of the land you are meeting on. I suppose it's a little bit about not going to someone else's house or home unless you welcome or invited. The reason I believe for this custom is to protect your spirit while you are on our land. I am a proud Ngunnawal woman as I carry my ancestors in spirit, walking into the future, teaching the next generations about the oldest culture in the world, my culture, the Aboriginal culture. I'd like to pay my respects to my elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people here this morning. But I'd also like to acknowledge all the non-Indigenous people here as well. As much as it kills me to say this, because I'll say this, because I'm on Ngunnawal land and I'm in Canberra and we're the only ones that voted yes. In keeping in the genuine spirit of friendship and reconciliation, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the land of the Ngunnawal people. And on behalf of my family, my two grandsons, Kane and Noah, that did the smoking for you, and my nephew, Kevin, my family and the other Ngunnawal families, I say welcome, welcome. And I hope you have a successful time. And I met with the First Nations people here yesterday afternoon, and I had such a wonderful, wonderful experience, them sharing their stories with us. So lots of magnificent things going on in communities, so we need to talk up more, and Australia needs to listen that we are doing good things here in Australia. It's just a pity that they didn't listen and learn what we wanted. All we wanted was a voice, and they didn't give us a voice. And we have a right to be included in this, in the Constitution. And I want to thank our Prime Minister, because it took us 10 years to get to where we were, and it was a simple gesture, and Australia didn't want it. Sad, shame day for Australia. God bless you all. Thank you.
So thank you to Auntie Violet for speaking her heart to us today, and Kane and Noah for the ceremony and having a bit of smoke. I said that they're really good at their job because I almost died in that smoke. The theme for this year's conference is Unite for Nature, and it's fitting, right? Because this is the first time in a very long time that we've actually all been able to get in a room together. Last time it was virtual. So we're literally uniting for nature. But I actually need to have a serious chat for you, which is not generally my style, before we go any further, because we are here right after the referendum. And the last 10 months have been incredibly stressful and draining for any of you who work in the reconciliation space, and really every Australian probably should consider themselves working in the reconciliation space. To the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here, I extend respect and the genuine hope on behalf of the conference organisers that you find this conference to be a fruitful couple of days. Your voice here matters. In conservation, your voice matters. And if you want to use your voice, we're here to listen. But also, an acknowledgement of the sort that these sorts of things can be a bit much sometimes, right? So I'm sure you're already aware that there's an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander safe space that's out in the area that's just behind the curtains. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders can go there, chill out, retreat, catch up, whatever you want. We want this to be a safe place for you to be. And the key thing is, for this whole conference, and the aim of the Conservation Alliance is to walk forward together. So let's start walking. My name is Anne Jones. I do nature podcasts and TV at the ABC, where they mostly edit out my swearing. And I'll be with you for the whole conference, making sure you know what's going on, sort of like a fairy godmother, but with a microphone. Now, I was preparing for these couple of days and I got really increasingly nervous because with every new speaker and every new panel, my cumulative fangirling got higher and higher, right? I am going to have to take someone's blood pressure pills before lunch, so sharing is caring. If you've got them, let me know. We started with Auntie Violet and now onto a different sort of leader, the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, the federal member for Sydney, who has been the Environment and Water Minister for just over a year, I think, but she's been 25 years in leadership in Parliament. So she's seen her fair share of battles and ups and downs. And on behalf of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, I welcome her up to the podium.
Thanks so much, Anne, for that welcome, and thank you, Auntie Violet. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room who feel the disappointment of the referendum loss, but I particularly want to acknowledge the pain of Indigenous leaders that we might have in the room with us today. Of course, acknowledge that we're on Ngunnawal land, but I know that there will be people from all over Australia who are here today. Indigenous Australians were at the heart of the Yes campaign, and many really led from the front, put themselves out there, and I know this must be a particularly difficult period after that extraordinary bravery. I want to say the best way that we can honour the courage of the people who stood up and argued for a yes vote is to make sure that in everything we do as a government from this day, we make sure that we are making every effort to reduce the gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, and to make sure that we do that, including in environmental and water policy. The vote that we had on Saturday night reminds us how important it is to double the number of Indigenous ranges that we have across the decade. It reminds us that we need to add to Indigenous protected areas. And in fact, we've just announced funding for 10 new Indigenous protected areas. And I just recently signed off on the Wutati IPA in Cape York. That's a fantastic addition to protected areas in Cape York. And of course, we're going to make sure that the absolute basics that most Australians take for granted are also provided to remote Indigenous communities. We've got a program of fixing up drinking water. There are 25,000 Australians that live in remote communities who don't have access to drinking water in Australia. I'm embarrassed to say this in front of our international guests. But in communities like Yuendamu and all through the Northern Territory in particular, but also parts of New South Wales, Queensland, WA, South Australia, we're making sure that we actually bring that most basic requirement of life into communities. So we will continue to work to redouble our efforts to address inequality and make sure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids have the same opportunities for a better future as any other Australian child. I want to thank the Australian Land Conservation Alliance for having me this morning, and to all of the farmers, the scientists, the conservationists who have come to Canberra this week. Thanks for being here. I'm very pleased that you made the trip. As the Minister for the Environment, I'm always looking for better ways of meeting the challenges that we face as a nation. And I think really that's what this conference is about, bringing people together, people who've got special skills and experience from the private sector, from the public sphere, to generate solutions for nature. Now, this conference has a particular focus, and that is protecting nature on private land. And it really is quite a substantial brief when you recognise that 60% of our Australian land mass is privately owned. Of course, nature doesn't stop at the border of our national parks. Private land is where a large proportion of critical habitats are found, and of course it's where some of our most endangered animals live. That means it has to be a central focus of our conservation efforts. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, it is an area where we've got a lot of room for improvement, where we can absolutely go beyond the sort of standard coalitions that we're used to, and where we have to look for new allies and friends, because I really do believe that there is a deep well of environmentalism to be tapped in our, particularly in our rural communities. I remember one of the early trips that I took as Minister for the Environment to Griffith. I went to the family farm of, let's call the guy Ben, because that was his name. He's someone who is he runs a big farm. His father, his mum and dad were there too. They'd started the family farm, and Ben and his wife were the next generation, and the kids were being brought up on the farm, probably a third generation of farmers. What was interesting was that Ben's generation were absolutely committed environmentalists, and they were the ones that convinced the parents that they needed to invest in protecting and restoring the native bush on their farm, building a corridor that would support the soil quality of the farm and providing homes for native plants and animals. So we did the full tour. They showed us what they were doing to the dams. They showed us where they were revegetating, the areas of remnant bushland that they'd protected, and the corridor that they were building to connect those areas of remnant bushland. And we kind of ended up in the four-wheel drive under this beautiful large tree, and all around, Ben was showing me the enormous eagle nest at the top of the tree and the carpet of small marsupial bones, I hope they were rabbits actually, all around the base of the tree. And the really important lesson for me in those early days of being the Environment Minister was that we have such an opportunity. Farmers and landholders, many of them feel a passionate connection to the land that they're farming and feel a desire to protect it. And the other lesson, I think, was unless we bring those people on board for our fight for nature, and we're not going to have the progress that we otherwise could. And so I've been thinking about that as we develop our environmental reforms, as we renew our legislation and so on. And so I wanted to today give you a little bit of an update on the reforms that we're proposing to manage nature across private and public land, across all forms of tenure and ownership, and just let you know the direction we're heading and give you a bit of an update on some of those reforms. But most particularly, I think, to talk to you a little bit about how the reforms that we're pursuing fit together. So one of the problems, I guess, in building momentum for change is that people look at a small piece of the puzzle and they say, well, that on its own is never going to fix nature. Nothing on its own is ever going to fix nature. What matters is that we change systems and the way that systems interact to support, rebuild, protect, enhance, restore our natural environment. So most often the policies that we're discussing are part of a bigger picture, a bigger machine to defend the environment. So I want to give you a bit of a sketch of the blueprint of that machine that we're building to make substantial root and branch structural reform to our system of environmental protection. I think what we're embarked on is the biggest and most serious change that we've seen in environmental law reform and systems reform that we've seen in a generation. And we have to do that because the scale of the challenge is so enormous, and that became pretty clear when we found the last State of the Environment report hidden in a dark cupboard somewhere in the back of the previous Environment Minister's office. We pulled it out, blew the dust off it, opened it up and found actually a most alarming story of environmental decline in Australia, and that is why we absolutely have to fundamentally rewrite Australia's broken environmental laws. The laws that govern all of the big developments that are happening in Australia, everybody knows they're broken. Everybody agrees that we need to change. Graham Samuel did a report for the previous government about the undeniable case for reform. That was 5 years ago, and crickets. There's overwhelming consensus, I think, from the environment movement and the business community that the laws are broken. We're living in the worst of both worlds. We're not protecting nature, and the laws are slow and cumbersome for business. So we can't kick the can down the road any further. The stage we're at the moment is we've done a massive amount of consultation. Many people in this room have been engaged in that. We've got draft laws and draft standards that we will begin targeted review of. We'll have people in a room, like a budget lockup, with the laws available, standards available. We'll do 2 days initially, and then every few weeks we'll bring more people in to look again at the laws and the standards that we have. We've got thousands of pages of drafting to do. This is the most enormous piece of legislative reform you can possibly imagine. And one of the reasons we're not just sticking it up on the internet is because we know that the risk of that is people will look at one piece of it without looking at the context, and they'll have no one to answer their questions. So the way we do it is we'll bring people in, we'll go through it with you, we'll have our lawyers on hand, we'll have the policy experts on hand, and make sure that we actually get this right. We need to fix what is currently a dysfunctional system. The most fundamental change we want to make is to take a legislative framework that is currently a net drain on the environment and switch it to be nature positive, a genuine benefit, so that we are actually improving our natural environment. Offsets, of course, should always be a last resort. They should involve active restoration in the same region with the same type of habitat, and under our system, that's what we will deliver. Now, it's one thing to have strong laws, it's another thing to make sure that they're being followed on the ground. I'm not surprised that people worry about the integrity of offsets. I've actually been having a good look at some of the offsets that have been agreed to by developers in previous developments, and you'll be unsurprised to know that people have not always kept their word, and we actually have to make sure that they do. We need to make sure that we have a tough cop on the beat so that people, we need strict laws, we need to make sure we've also got strict enforcement. So we're setting up Environment Protection Australia because we've got a trust deficit that we need to overcome. People don't believe in the current system because it's not clear that approvals have been followed in practice. So the EPA will have to ensure that we change that, giving us that tough cop on the beat. It'll be independent, it'll be transparent, it'll be arm's length from government, making environmental assessments, deciding whether projects can proceed and under what conditions, and then enforcing those decisions in the community. Stronger laws and a powerful EPA, Environment Protection Australia, to back them in. These are two of the foundational principles of our agenda. But we're also looking for creative ways to build on that foundation, to bring in more funding from more new sources to support the necessary work of conservation and restoration. And that's the essential idea behind our nature repair market. As everybody in this room knows, our fight for nature has to reach across that 60% of the Australian landscape that is privately owned. It can't be confined to national parks and other places of sanctuary. The purpose of our legislation is to promote and reward landholders for their good environmental work, making it easier for businesses, philanthropists and other Australians to invest in activities that protect and restore nature, connecting people who want to invest in this work with people who can do it on the ground, not to replace government effort, but to reinforce it and add to it. This scheme will bring more money into nature repair, and it will guarantee, and this is really important, it will guarantee that the money is doing what it is supposed to do, using high integrity methods that can be tracked and traced. The fourth crucial element of our agenda is a commitment to protecting 30% of our land and sea by the end of this decade. We're currently at 22% of our land and 48% of our ocean. The remaining 8% might sound like a small number, it's a single digit, but it is a massive amount of land we need to protect. Roughly 9 times the size of Tasmania, about 60 million hectares. Getting to 30% is going to be a really big undertaking, requiring a range of different tools and methods. Since coming to office, we've added about 40 million hectares of land and sea to our national estate. And in particular, we've expanded the marine park around Macquarie Island. This is one of the largest conservation decisions made anywhere on Earth at any point this year. And while I said that 48% of our oceans are protected, this doesn't stop us from wanting to provide higher levels of protection in parts of that ocean as well. And I've got the agreement of the environment ministers, state and territory environment ministers, to pursue higher degrees of protection in many of our ocean conservation areas as well. We're also growing our Indigenous Protected Area program, as I said, and today I want to announce another addition to our 30 by 30 toolkit, $25 million to protect more of our land mass, with $25 million to encourage private and philanthropic investment in land conservation and management. We've just announced the first of these projects, which is in the Victorian Riverina, protecting a key grassland habitat of the plains wanderer. You are all pretty familiar, I guess, with the plains wanderer, which is a beautiful small bird, but of course critically endangered, with perhaps just 250 left in the wild. It's found only in grasslands. It relies on those habitats to survive, and we'll be working with the Victorian Government, with Trust for Nature Victoria and with the Nature Conservancy and with private sponsors like Country Road to actively restore these environments. That's been a short overview of some of the things that we're doing in the environment area: stronger laws, stronger enforcement, more funding and more protected land. It's big picture reform, hoping to address some of the root causes of our problems. Reform that's being supported by work across the country in local programs dealing with specific environmental issues. No government has invested more in nature than we have, delivering the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, the country's biggest financial investment in conservation, protecting over 1 million square kilometres of inland Australia, doubling federal funding to national parks, doubling the number of renewable energy projects that are being approved, doubling our recycling capacity, doubling the number of Indigenous ranges, restoring our urban rivers and catchments with a $200 million program, fighting for 0 new extinctions on this continent, funding the Environment Protection Defender's Office for the first time in 9 years, doubling funding for the Australian Institute of Marine Science, investing $1.2 billion to protect the Great Barrier Reef. We're investing, we're working to get the architecture right, and we're matching it on the ground in local communities. Work that needs the help of everyone here at this conference. So thank you for what you're doing, caring for your home, protecting nature on private land. It's critical work, it's nation-building work, and it has the full support of the Australian Government. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister, and I think I speak on behalf of everyone here. For a bunch of greenie hippies, we really do love money, so if you've got any more, just keep it coming. Now, Dr. Jodie Gunn should be a stranger to none of you, I hope, because she's the head honcho. She's the CEO of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, the overarching organiser of this conference, the body that looks to amplify the impact of all of your actions in conservation. But did you know she actually wrote her PhD on human-elephant interactions in East Africa? I know, she is more than equipped to deal with politicians. She's got many more fascinating secrets, I'm sure. We'll squeeze them out of her over the next couple of days. So make sure you say hello to her in her breaks because she knows literally everyone. And give her a big welcome to the podium today.
Thank you. I'm not sure I've had elephants and politicians reflected in the same sentence before with me, so that's a new one. Thank you. I understand, I appreciate that our guests have left the room, but I would like to thank Auntie Violet for welcoming us to Ngunnawal country and for her important reflections, very strong reflections and story. I want to thank her for her leadership here in Canberra and for being with us, not just for this morning, but for yesterday and for a good part of this week. So we're very appreciative of that. I made some more detailed comments last night at our welcome reception and reiterate today the referendum has cast a vote that demands a very significant reflection for all of us across the society. ALCA remains determined with the realisation that the principles of the referendum for recognition and for listening must now be put into practical and tangible actions. ALCA recognises and respects the deep and enduring relationship that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have with land, sea and water, and the enduring persistence, knowledge and connection built over tens of thousands of years. And we recognise that working in managing and caring for country benefits from listening to and applying the knowledge and leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So today we stand with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who have travelled vast distances to be here in the room together to walk on this journey, both with people and with planet. And I acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room with us today. Thank you also to Minister Plibersek for her passion and her commitment. The Australian Land Conservation Alliance, as you know, and as she has pointed out, is the peak national body representing organisations that work to conserve, to manage and to restore nature. across privately managed land, and she made note and reference of the importance of that work. We've brought conservation sector and our partners here to the Australian capital city so that Minister Plibersek, the government, may understand, value and enable more impact for conservation and for land management, and to strengthen our partnership with the Australian government. We welcome the comments that Minister Plibersek has made today, the additional IPA funding, the $25 million to achieve a very ambitious 30 by 30 target, for acknowledging the role of privately managed land in addressing the challenges that we have ahead, and for the work and the consultation to develop strong reforms and to acknowledge the hard work that is going to be required to collectively get that done. Together, our sector and the government have the opportunity to continue to deliver solutions and meet the shared targets that we have set for biodiversity in Australia. Given the rate of biodiversity loss, there is a tough path ahead and much work to be done. And while government action is not the only piece of the puzzle, it is, as we know, a critical piece. There remains a multi-billion-dollar gap between the resources that we have to deliver and the task ahead of us. Australia needs a whole-of-government response to the nature crisis, strong laws, and given the scale of the challenge, major cornerstone investment from the government to optimise the contribution that conservation and land management sector can then leverage and deliver, and we thank them for the announcements made this morning. Alongside government, philanthropy, industry and the private sector will all be critical to reverse the decline of our biodiversity. Fighting the nature crisis is a shared national project and a global challenge. Only when the resources and the capacity match the enormity and the urgency of the challenge can the social, economic and environmental outcomes that we are already delivering be leveraged and scaled. For in Australia and around the world, there has never been a more urgent and serious need to protect, manage and restore nature. The impacts of biodiversity loss and climate change is indiscriminatory and is affecting livelihoods from urban areas to regional communities. Our opportunities to ensure our children will be able to walk under ancient trees still standing, see a bettong in the wild, or swim in a globally recognised reef system are diminishing daily. Extreme weather and increasing intensity of floods and fires is having profound effects not only on the human lives and environmental systems that are directly impacted, but on the regional economies and supply chains that are underpinned by healthy, functioning environments. More than half of our gross domestic product is dependent on nature. Our natural capital, like soils, grasslands, forests, water, air, the costs of investing in protecting biodiversity or delivering nature-based solutions will increasingly outweigh the costs of no action. When we stop seeing nature as an externality to our business and our way of living, we'll begin to realise the economic opportunities that come from investing in it. For nature underpins the very fabric of our social and economic well-being. These challenges are not stopping us from getting on with the job at hand, for we are a determined sector. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of spending time on country, delivering action for conservation and the protection of species and ecosystems. And in doing so, I've been in the company of passionate people, like all of you in the room, doing incredible and relentless work. I've walked country with reserve managers and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as we identify cultural and biodiversity values and find pathways for protecting them. I've worked with farmers who have co-designed new mechanisms to put conservation dollars on the balance books. And I've been head down, bum up with landholders and ecologists looking for native orchids or billy buttons, sharing in awe this credible natural world that we steward. And I tell you this because these are the people and this is the work that gives me hope. We all have stories like this that are about protecting more than just place. These stories are of the people choosing to make space for nature, delivering their cultural obligations, feeding our communities from healthy, productive lands, or protecting habitat in perpetuity so our children are able to walk out in nature under those ancient trees. These experiences reflect the theme of this year's conference, which is Unite for Nature, which also reflects our sector's greatest strength our ability to bring people together. Together, we are restoring endangered ecosystems, tackling invasive species, and using nature-based solutions to tackle climate change. In implementing this work, we are deeply embedded in regional communities and economies. We create jobs, we attract significant regional investment, and bring many spillover effects for community wellbeing and food security. Our work is to achieve our vision of a future where nature thrives, cared for by empowered people and resilient communities. This vision is shared by our members, and I would like to acknowledge our 4 conference partners for their support, leadership and commitment. The Australian Wildlife Conservancy, Bush Heritage Australia, Greening Australia and the Nature Conservancy, and we thank you for your work and your support. And so I'm filled with hope by seeing you all in this room, a room which is getting bigger and more diverse. We'll hear across the days from agriculture about their dependence on natural capital and the opportunities this presents for transitions to sustainable food futures. We'll see examples of industry shifts that reflect nature dependencies and learn more about the opportunities that come with building biodiversity into the balance books. We'll hear from experts in health about the importance of nature for human health. Global drivers and frameworks mean nature is now at the heart of conversations and being recognised as a critical solution. Over the coming days, we'll show that the private land conservation sector and its partners are getting on with the job, and we thank those who are with us on this journey. Some of those include supporters of our work, and I want to thank the major sponsors for PLC 23. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge, the ongoing support of the BHP Foundation for their multi-year partnership with us to deliver our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander access and engagement strategy. We thank the Australian Government Department of Climate Change, the Environment and Water, and the New South Wales Government, including multi-year support from the Biodiversity Conservation Trust, ANZ Bank, Ernst & Young and Rejuvenation Trees, and I encourage you to go and find them in the exhibition. ELCA, together with our members, represents a substantial and growing voice in the Australian land management sector. The work of our members has influenced biodiversity outcomes across 3 million square kilometres of Australia. Our members alone, and there are 17 at this time, employ over 950 staff, and our non-profit members generate over $325 million in annual turnover applied to the work on the ground, the majority of which is non-government funding. Our influence and footprint is growing, and there is opportunity to do so much more. ELCA has drafted a statement to Parliament. You can find this in the member zone, and we welcome your engagement with it. A number of delegates from our conference look forward to taking that to Minister Plibersek's office this week, and we are ready. We need the government with us, and we need all of you in the room and the partners with us today. We are here uniting as a sector for the first time in real life since 2019 in record-breaking numbers. We're here to grow our networks, our capacity and to chart a way forward. We're here uniting across sectors and across cultures because we recognise that the interconnected climate and biodiversity crisis needs a whole-of-society response and that we need all hands on deck. So delegates, speakers, guests, thank you for joining us at PLC 23. Let's celebrate and be inspired by the impact of our work, the scale of the solutions already in front of us, and bridge the sectoral and cultural barriers to unleash our full potential. Thank you all for being here.